Hey guys, welcome back to day 2 of the graphs. Um, well, didn't want that. We want to start here. Um, so we're going to talk about graphing these, including some transformations. Now, we're not going to cover all of them today. We're actually going to cover 2 of them today. And the 2 we're going to cover are the A and the B. So they're, son of a gun, not what I meant. They're what we're multiplying by, not the numbers you're adding or subtracting. Okay. And so A, I would recommend writing this down, this entire slide down. A directly changes the amplitude. Okay, so that's easy enough. If you want to think about it, our amplitude yesterday was always 1, right? Well, if you're multiplying a number by that value, you're just multiplying how high or how low it can get, right? And so this number directly influences the amplitude. So if it's 5 sine of x, the amplitude's 5. If it's 4, it's 4, so on and so forth. So that one's actually pretty easy. And then B changes the period slash cycle. Now it doesn't mean it is a period or cycle. B changes the period cycle. And the next slide shows you how, okay? And so basically, we saw this slide yesterday. To find the period, you take 2 pi divided by the absolute value of your b. So b is not your period or cycle. It's important to know that. You use it to find the period. So the period of your graph is going to be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of b. That's what the period is going to equal. The period does not equal b. Okay, b is not our period. It's used to find our period. So your period is 2 pi divided by b. Okay. So let's determine the period and let's determine the amplitude. So first off, you have 5 times cosine. Now the number on the outside tells us the amplitude. This would be our A. So our amplitude would be 5. And then this number right here, we're going to use to find our period. The period equals 2 pi times the absolute value of b, which is 2, which equals 2 pi over 2, which equals just pi. So the period of that is pi. And so in general, if this number is bigger than 1, our period is going to get smaller. So it kind of makes the frequency quicker. You'll see there's more waves in these graphs. If it's smaller than 1, so like over here, our period is going to get larger. Okay? So y equals 3 times sine of x. Well, the 3 is on the outside. That tells us the amplitude. So our amplitude equals 3. And then our period equals 2 pi divided by, well, there's no value there, so it's really 1, just like yesterday. So the period's 2 pi. It's unchanged. Then right here, there is no number, there's no a value. So our amplitude is just our generic 1. Our period equals 2 pi divided by the absolute value of that number, which is 1 over 3. And so we have to use some Algebra 1 skills. Dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by a reciprocal. So you get 2 pi times 3 over 1, which equals 6 pi. So your period would be 6 pi there. Okay, so again, kind of counterintuitive, but if the number's smaller, the period's greater. If the value's bigger, the period's smaller. Okay. Now we got to talk about if there's negatives. Basically, we can look at this a value. This is our a value, right? and we know that the amplitude is going to be 2. So we're not going to say the amplitude is a negative number. The amplitude would be 2. If the negative's on the outside of the function, you switch the crests slash troughs. So I'm going to switch over to Desmos so you guys can maybe see visually what that's going to look like. Nope, didn't mean that. So let's do cosine of theta. Can't forget the y. And then y equals, let's do negative cosine of theta. So if you look, red is our original function. And right here is one of our crests. And if you look at our second function, where it was a crest, now it's a trough. And that's going to be true for every crest slash trough. They basically switch. So where it was a high point, it's now a low point. So that's pretty easy with when the negative's out front. What changes is if the negative's on the inside. Well, if you want to think about it, cosine is the same to the left as it is to the right of the y-axis. So if you plug in a negative on the inside, nothing changes. And that's because if you want to think about it, if you plug in values, if you plug in cosine of negative pi, that's the same as cosine of pi. And so just because you throw in this negative here, it's not going to really change anything. Okay? However, sine is not the same way. Because sine is definitely not the same from the left to the right of the y-axis, right? If you go to the left of the y-axis, it's going down, 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 then up. On the right side, it's going up and then down. So if you see sine of negative theta, it does end up just changing the crest and trough. So if you see the negative, it basically just changes the crests and troughs. The only time it doesn't is for cosine on the inside. Okay? So going back to this right here, play from current slide. We said our amplitude was 2. And you switch the crests slash troughs, okay? Negative cosine, the negative's on the outside, so you do end up switching the crests and the troughs. Now this guy right here, our amplitude is 2, but the negative's on the inside, which doesn't change anything for cosine. However, for sine, oh, sorry, that's not the amplitude. If it's the amplitude, it'd be right here. Remember, this is our B value. So our amplitude is still 1. We don't switch our crests and troughs, but what we will do is we have to find our new period, which the period or the cycle equals 2 pi divided by the absolute value of negative 2. We're never going to get a negative period. That just doesn't make sense. Okay? And so even if this is a negative value, we say absolute value because it's always going to be positive. So your period would end up being pi. And then for sine, the amplitude is unchanged. The period is 2 pi divided by the absolute value of negative 5, which is just 5. That looks like 24 pi. That's just 2 pi. So your period is 2 pi over 5. Can't simplify that. And then you have to switch the crests and the troughs. Okay? And so those are kind of the transformations we're just going to talk about today. So we talked about negatives, we talked about the amplitude, and we talked about our B value, which changes our period. So we looked at A and B. Okay. Now our homework is going to be on IXL. I'm going to have a separate video, and it's basically me doing the homework assignment, because there's some tricks to it. It's a little different. I would hope you guys can figure it out, but just in case, I'm going to do some for you. Now your goal is going to stay on the HyperDoc, but it's to get 70 points. I see how many you've done, how many problems you've done, how many points you get. So that's how I'm going to check your homework. So you don't need to submit anything. All you need to do is reach 70 points. So my video tutorial on how to log in will be me doing basically some of this homework assignment. I will have a document that shows you your username and password so you can log in. It's not the same as Mr. Freeze's login. So if you were with Mr. Freeze, it's a different account. Otherwise, if you use your old account, I'm not going to be able to see anything. Sorry. So with that, make sure you watch the tutorial. It can help you solve some of those problems. And I will see you guys tomorrow.